Welcome to the video solution for the Open Awards Writing Paper 3 Functional Skills Level 2 exam. In this video we're going to go through both of the writing questions on this exam and have a look at the mark scheme and see how we can write a really good answer for both questions. So question 1 is a scenario. Now both of the questions will be set out like this, but you'll have a different scenario and a different text type, audience and purpose to write for each question. Question 1. You recently stayed at Brute's Hotel in Maidford and overall had a good time. However, there were some problems with the accommodation, so you decided to write an email to the manager of the hotel. In your email, say when and why you stayed at the hotel, what you liked and what problems you had. You should also state what you would like the hotel to do. Okay, so there's a few things we need to break down with this question before we can start writing it. So the first thing you should notice is the text type. So the text type here is an email, and we need to write an email to the manager of the hotel. So the audience is our manager of the hotel. So when we notice the text type that we need to write, you should also be thinking about the formatting features that you need to use for that text type, which we'll have a look at when we look at the model solution. When we think about the audience, this should inform the formality of our writing, the language we use. So the manager of the hotel is quite a professional person. We don't know them personally, so we want to use formal professional writing. Now, the purpose of this text is not really explicitly told to us, so we have to kind of work it out from what the question is asking us to do. So we know we've got some problems with the accommodation, so we decide to write an email, and we need to say why and when you stayed at the hotel, what we liked and what problems we had, and state what we would like the hotel to do. So the purpose of this text will be to explain our situation. So we need to use enough detail to give information on the things we've been asked to include. We don't have a word count for this question. It would be here if we did. However, that doesn't mean that we can write less. We still want to aim for around 3 good sized paragraphs. A good way to split up your paragraphs is to use what you've been asked to write about. So say when and why you stayed at the hotel. That would be a good paragraph number 1. What you liked and what problems you had. You could do that in one paragraph, or you could split up it into your likes and the problems. And then we should also state what you would like the hotel to do. Now it might be a good idea to give them a couple of options just to add detail to our answer. And as is the case with all of the writing questions, both the writing questions on your exam, this is worth 30 marks. So we're going to have a look at the mark scheme and see where we can get those 30 marks. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at the mark scheme then for all writing questions. Now how this is fulfilled will depend on the few things that we've looked at already in the question. So what text type you're writing, the purpose and the audience of your text. So make sure that you know all of that before you start writing. So the first point in our mark scheme is clarity. So this just means that making sure your answer is clear throughout is really important. So being able to write in clear, coherent sentences that are grammatically correct will contribute to this. Making sure that any spelling errors don't affect the examiner being able to actually understand what the word says. And also planning your answer can help with this, so making sure that it has a clear logical structure and the order of things that you're writing down are logical. Next we've got detail, so this refers to kind of the length of your answer and the amount of detail that you're including. So first thing to note with this is if you do have a word count in the question, make sure that you stick to that. It's a really good idea to practice writing around 250 to 350 word answers before the exam, because you won't get a word counter in the exam, so you'll need to know kind of how many paragraphs roughly that is going to be and what it looks like on the page. If you don't have a word count, you still need to make sure that you're expanding upon all of the things that they've included in the question, so make sure that you read that question really carefully. This level of detail also needs to meet the purpose and the audience. So for example, if your text is trying to explain, you need to include enough detail to meet that purpose. So lots of facts and information. We've also got format. Now this will be different depending on whatever text type that you're writing. but each text type has specific essential formatting features that you need to include, so make sure you're comfortable with all of those before you go into your exam. We've also got visual organisation. So for this we need to be able to use organisational markers effectively. So these are words that help your writing flow better. So just to give you a few examples, we've got words like firstly, secondly, as well as, therefore, despite, however, and so on. So make sure you're comfortable with using words like those to make your writing flow better. You also get marks here for using visual organisational features, so things like bullet points are a really good thing to include. Also make sure that you're using subheadings, paragraphs, headings, if they're appropriate for the text type that you're writing. But you do need to use paragraphs in every single text that you write. Next we've got register and language. So this mainly refers to the level of formality in your writing, so making sure that you know whether your audience requires formal language or more informal language. This might also depend on the text type as well, so if you're writing a leaflet you might be able to be a little bit more informal than if you're writing a letter or a report. But make sure that you look at the audience and the purpose to decide the level of formality that you need to use in your writing. Next we've got construction, so this refers to complex sentences and paragraphs. So make sure that you're splitting your work up into paragraphs. You can use the question to help you with this as well. You can sort of do a paragraph on each thing that they ask you to write about and expand upon. Then complex sentences are a type of sentence that we use in our writing, where we have two or more parts of the sentence and one or more of those parts doesn't make sense on its own, so it needs the next part of the sentence to make it make sense. Now, don't worry if that's a little bit confusing at this stage. We will have a look at complex sentences when we look at the model answer. But essentially, you just want to try and write different types of sentences. So again, using organisational markers to help your writing flow better and to start sentences with different words is really helpful. Then we've got spelling. So with spelling, it's really important to spell a range of words correctly. So try and broaden your vocabulary and learn any spellings you know you struggle with. You also need to try and include some specialist words in your writing. So depending on what the topic is, a specialist word is a word that is only to do with that topic or it's specific to that topic. So for example, if we had to write an article on healthy eating, we might include lots of specialist terms like protein, carbohydrate, and so on. Next we've got punctuation. So again, same as with spelling, we need to include a wide range of punctuation. So try and get as much complex punctuation as you can in your answer. So commas, apostrophes, colons, and then even some quotation marks if you can as well. You also need to make sure that your punctuation at the beginning and end of your sentences is correct, so capital letters at the start and full stops to end sentences, or question marks and exclamation marks if they're needed. Then finally we've got grammar. So grammar refers to making sure that your sentences are constructed correctly and they all make sense. So again, we need to use correct and complex grammar. So this includes the subject-verb agreement, making sure that the subject of your sentence matches with the verb, the doing word, making sure you're using articles correctly, so a, an, or the, depending on which one is correct in the context of your sentence. We also need to use modality devices, which is basically just modal verbs, so words like could, should, must, can, and would, to give you a few examples. And we also need to use a variety of different tenses for grammar. So try and write in the present tense and also the past tense, and then if you can also write in the future tense. So those are the three tenses you need to try and write in. Okay, so here is the written solution then for this question. Now we've got a reminder of our question in the top right corner here. So remember, we're writing an email to the hotel manager and we're writing to explain these things here. mainly the problems that we had, what we liked and what we would like the hotel to do about the problems. Okay, so we're just going to go through each section of the mark scheme explaining why this is a good answer in relation to each of the points. So in terms of clarity, all of this makes sense and it's in a really logical order and structure as well. They start off by explaining why they're writing, saying that overall they had a good time, however there were some drawbacks. Then they logically go on to suggest what the hotel's going to do about it in the last paragraph. All of the sentences make sense as well throughout the answer, so it's really clear. There's no bits that are a little bit unclear or confusing. Next, if we think about detail, now remember there isn't a word count for this question, but we do still need to go into detail, especially with these points that we've been asked to talk about in the question. So as we've already mentioned, it's a good idea to do a paragraph on each of these. So the student has done that very well. They've explained what they liked. So they said the staff were friendly and helpful. The breakfasts were absolutely delicious and plentiful each morning. And also they talked about the central location as well. Then they've gone on to talk about the problems. So remember, the examiner doesn't want you to just briefly mention one problem here. We want to include enough detail. So try and give a few problems and also explain why they were a problem as well. So just to give you an example here, we've got the room we stayed in had a leaking tap in the bathroom. That's the problem, which caused a small puddle on the floor. So that's the reason why it was a problem as well. So this will help you to expand your answer and include enough detail. Then in the last paragraph, we've talked about some suggestions that the hotel could do to improve the comfort of future guests and kind of what you would want them to do. In the question, it just says you should state what you would like the hotel to do, so it gives you a bit of creative freedom to think about what sort of suggestions you would like to make. Then if we think about format, so remember this is an email, so we've got our to line here with the email address, which is actually given to us in the question, so make sure you look out for that. It's quite common in emails and letter questions, they will give you an address or an email address to write to. We've also got a subject summarising what our email is going to be about. We've got our greeting at the start. Dear hotel manager, we don't know their name, so hotel manager is fine. And then we've got an appropriate sign off and the sender's name at the end. Next, if we have a think about visual organisation and that part of the mark scheme, we've got lots of organisational markers throughout. So for example, we've got overall. We've also got however to start this paragraph, showing a contrast. We've got additionally to add extra information here, and also therefore to show that we're linking that again with the previous paragraph. We've also got words like also to add ideas and which to show the result of something. We don't have too many visual organisational markers. It might be a good idea to add some bullet points in here if possible. But we do have paragraphs and appropriate spacing throughout the email. In terms of register and language, as we've already mentioned, this email should be written in a formal way, using formal professional language due to the audience here. And we've definitely got that. We've got a lack of contractions, so I am writing rather than I'm writing. We've got generally formal phrasing like words like plentiful and some long complex sentences throughout as well. For example, it would also be appreciated if I could receive a partial refund or a discount on a future stay as a gesture of goodwill for the inconvenience my family and I experienced. Then that leads us on nicely to construction. So we've got complex sentences, as we've already mentioned, and we've also got paragraphs throughout. So again, make sure that you're using the question to help you. It's usually split up quite nicely for you into paragraphs already in this part of the question. Then finally, let's think about spelling, punctuation and grammar. So in terms of spelling, remember that it's not enough to just spell everything that you write correctly. We also need to make sure that we're using consistently complex, specialist and irregular words. So some complex words that we've got in here, words like plentiful and delicious, spelt quite difficult words to spell. We've also got words that are not spelt phonetically, so they're not spelt how they would sound, so that makes it harder for them to spell. So words like suggest, we might think that there was a J in there somewhere, but there isn't, and there's also that double G to remember in the middle. Same with gesture, and also location. In terms of specialist words, we don't have too many in here. We do have air conditioning unit. Conditioning is quite a hard word to spell on its own as well. So overall the spelling is really strong and we've got a lot of harder to spell words spelt correctly in there. Then in terms of punctuation, again, it's not enough to just use full stops and capital letters correctly. Although we do have that here. So we've got Brooks Hotel, which is given to us in the question, but make sure that you do capitalise things that need to be capitalised. So this is the name of a hotel and also a place name, Maidford, so we need to capitalise those. We also need to capitalise months of the year, so that's been done correctly here as well. We've got capital letters at the start of sentences correctly as well, and all of the sentences end in a full stop. We also need to try and use complex punctuation where possible. So this includes commas, colons, quotation marks and apostrophes. So throughout we've got really strong use of commas. For example, in this sentence, in particular, the staff were friendly and helpful and the breakfast were absolutely delicious and plentiful each morning. So we've got a couple of commas in this sentence showing where we've got the different parts of the sentence and also where we would take a break, take a breath naturally when reading that sentence out loud. So if you struggle with commas and where to put them, that can really help you to work out where the comma should go. We do have a couple of possessive apostrophes for the name of the hotel used here, but that is given to you in the question, so it's not the best example. We could have improved this if there were a couple of other uses of possessive apostrophes. Remember, it's formal writing, so we shouldn't be using any contractions, but possessive apostrophes for belonging are fine. We could also improve this in terms of punctuation if we had a colon in here as well. But overall, the punctuation is accurate and we do have some really complex comma usage in here to construct complex sentences. Then finally, in terms of grammar, in order to get 4 marks for grammar, we need to include complex grammar structures, for example, the subject-verb agreement, using a variety of tenses, definite and indefinite articles and modal verbs. So I'm just going to go through and show you where all of those have been used. So firstly, the subject-verb agreement. So for example, down here we've got I hope that I will return. So in this sentence, I is the subject and hope is the verb, the doing word. So I and hope match up together. If we changed I to he or she, we would change hope to hopes. But these two match up correctly in this sentence and it's also correct throughout the rest of the answer. We've also got a variety of tenses used throughout. So we've got the present tense at the start, I am writing to provide feedback on my recent stay. So something that's happening now in the present tense. Then we switch to the past tense because we're talking about something that happened in the past. They're describing their stay. So we had a good time at the hotel. There were a few issues with the accommodation. And then we've actually also got some future tense here. So I will return, that bit that we've just looked at there. So I will, that word will is how we construct the future tense. So we've got all 3 tenses used here. So that's extremely good in terms of grammar. We've also got definite and indefinite articles. For example, here we've got, it would be appreciated if I could receive a partial refund or a discount. So this is the indefinite article a here because the partial refund has not been previously discussed by the two people involved, it's just something that's being suggested now as a general suggestion. Here we've got a definite article, so the room we stayed in had a leaking tap in the bathroom, and that's because they're talking about the specific bathroom that they stayed in during their stay, so we need the definite article. And then finally, modal verbs. We've got lots of these actually. We've got I would like to suggest, so would there is the modal verb. It would also be appreciated if I could receive a partial refund, so could is also a modal verb. And we've got could and would used as well in the second paragraph again. So overall, this is a really strong answer in all aspects of the mark scheme, and hopefully you now understand how you can do all of these things in your own answers. Question 2. 6 months ago, you attended a local council meeting where the issue of litter in your area was discussed. You've now been asked by the residents group to write an article for the local newspaper explaining what the problems are, what has improved and what still needs improving. Okay, so this is question 2 on this paper, and notice that a few things have changed. So the whole scenario has changed. We've got a different context here as to why we're writing. Also, our text type has changed. So here we're now writing an article. So we need to remember the formatting features for an article. We're writing that for a local newspaper, so our audience is going to be local newspaper readers. So we want to use quite formal language, and our purpose is to explain these things, so what the problems were, what has improved and what still needs improving. So in order to fulfill that purpose, we're going to need to use formal language, lots of detail and probably some facts as well, and these can definitely just be made up facts. For this question we do have a word count. The article should be between 250 and 350 words. And again, we've got 30 marks. Okay, so here is the written solution then for question 2. So we've got a reminder of our question in the top right corner here. Remember, we have a word count for this question, and we need to write an article for a local newspaper. Okay, so let's go through the mark scheme then and see how that has been fulfilled in this question. So in terms of clarity, all of the answer makes sense, and it comes in a logical order as well. They start off with an introduction explaining the context of the article, so about the local council meeting. They then go on to talk about the positives, so the improvements that have been made since the meeting. And they also use some organisational markers such as firstly, secondly and furthermore to further organise their writing and make it really clear. They then go on to talk about some possible negatives, so the areas that still need improvement, again using organisational markers to do so. And then we've got a nice conclusion, succinct at the end there. Also, all of the sentences make sense throughout and there's nothing that's unclear. In terms of detail, everything has been addressed and expanded upon in the answer that was mentioned in the question. So we needed to explain what the problems were, which has been done in the introduction there. What has improved, which has been done under the improvements made subheading, and what still needs improving, which has been done under the areas needing improvement subheading. Notice that we've actually got sort of 3 paragraphs under the improvements made and 2 paragraphs under the areas needing improvement section. So this gives you an idea of how much you need to expand upon each of these points. So although the points in the question are good to follow and spring from, you do need to make sure that you expand upon these. So planning your answer is a really good idea. And then if we think about formatting, remember this is an article. So we need to include several different formatting features for that text type. So we've got up here our title or our heading, litter problem in our area. That's to tell the reader what it's going to be about, what the article is going to be about. And then underneath we need a strap line. And this is, think of it as an extra heading. It's giving us a little bit more information on what that heading says and what the whole text is going to be about. We've also got an author attribution, or the author's name, who's written it. We've got subheadings as well. throughout. Then in terms of visual organisation, as we've already mentioned, we've got lots of organisational markers that have been used throughout in order to add more structure and flow to the writing. We've also got some visual markers like subheadings, paragraphs, sections. We've also got a heading as well as a strapline. We could maybe add some bullet points in here to increase the visual organisation aspect. In terms of register and language, remember we need to write formally. It's a newspaper article, so these tend to be quite formal texts, and it's also quite a serious topic as well. So formal phrasing has been used. For example, many residents express their concerns about an increasing amount of rubbish. Complex sentences also add to the formality. For example, despite the increased number of bins, littering is still rife amongst some groups in our community. We also don't have any contractions used, so words in their full form like we have rather than we've. And then in terms of construction, remember you're marked on varied sentence structures including complex sentences. So we've already highlighted one complex sentence there. We've got a few more throughout the answer, and generally we've got really varied sentence structures throughout that are constructed accurately. And we've also got appropriate paragraphs. So when you think about paragraphs, remember you should have sort of one topic or point per paragraph. So when you move on to talking about something new, we start a new paragraph. And then finally, let's think about spelling, punctuation and grammar. So remember, for spelling, punctuation and grammar, it needs to be accurate, but it also needs to be complex and varied throughout. So with spelling, we've got consistently strong spelling throughout, but we've also got some really high level, more difficult to spell words, including some specialist words as well. So if we just have a look, we've got some double letter words like attended and discussed and expressed. So these are words with double letters in that are often missed out. So they're classed as harder to spell words. We've also got some words that are spelt not phonetically, so they're not spelt how we would say them out loud, which makes them harder to spell. For example, words like action, we've got that T-I-O-N, which makes that shun sound. We've also got equipment, which often sounds like it has a T in the middle, but the correct spelling does not. We've also got specialist words, so whatever the topic you're given in your question, it's helpful to think of some specialist words you can include in your answer. So here we're talking about the issue of litter and also councils, so we can think of some specialist words to do with that. So for example, we've got community cleanup events, clean environment, educational programs, recycling. So overall the spelling in this answer is really strong and high level throughout. Next, let's look at the punctuation. So remember, we need to have accurate punctuation but also some complex punctuation. So we've got capital letters and full stops where they should be in terms of our standard punctuation at the start and end of sentences. And then throughout we've also got really accurate use of commas. For example, in this sentence, firstly, the council has installed more bins in busy areas, making it easier for people to dispose of their rubbish properly. So we've got two commas here to separate the different parts of the sentence. Again, it's really useful to read your work out loud if you're not sure where commas are going to be, because it'll usually be where you'll naturally pause and take a breath. We've also got a possessive apostrophe, the council's support, aka the support of the council, the support belonging to the council. To improve this answer slightly, we could also include a colon. Finally, looking at grammar. So remember, grammar again has to be accurate but also complex, so we need to have the correct subject-verb agreement throughout, use a variety of tenses, use definite and indefinite articles, and use modal verbs. So let's have a look at how that's been done here. So the answer begins in the past tense. I attended a local council meeting in the past, something that has already happened. The council listened to our worries, so again, something that's happened in the past. Then when we talk about the improvements made, we're talking in the present tense, so these bins are emptied more regularly. So something that's happening now. Then the answer continues in the present tense, so despite the increased number of bins, littering is still rife amongst some groups in our community. So we've got multiple tenses constructed well there. Next, thinking about the subject-verb agreement. So this is where our subject in our sentence and our verb need to match with each other. If we take this example, they are encouraged. So the word they here is the subject, are forms part of our verb. So are is used and that matches up with they. It's the plural verb to match our plural subject. If we had he or she, are would change to is. Next, moving on to definite and indefinite articles. In the first paragraph, we've got many residents express their concerns about the increasing amount of rubbish on our streets. So here, the definite article that is used because they're talking about a specific amount of rubbish that they're all aware of, that they're talking about. We've got an indefinite article A here, the importance of a clean environment, because they're just talking generally about a general clean environment. This can be any sort of clean environment. It's not one that we, the reader and the writer, are both aware of. Then finally, we've got modal verbs. Down here we've got could. The council could consider increasing fines, so showing the ability of the council to do that. Again, perhaps local businesses could sponsor these events. We've got can down here. We can make our area a cleaner and more pleasant place to live. So overall, this is a really strong answer, and hopefully after watching this video and understanding the mark scheme, you now have a better idea of how to write your own answers in your Open Awards exam.